Stay Home Log On Town Hall. We thank you for joining us tonight. We want to welcome you. I want to thank my co-hosts, Sandra and Vanessa, for allowing us to have this conversation on the platform. We want to thank all of our speakers that are joining us tonight for this great conversation. So I'm going to kick it off by saying, what's up to my girl, Sandra? What's good?
Hello, how are you all?
V.
Hi, everyone.
And these are the ladies from the VSS Hour. We host a weekly show that really talks about current issues that are happening in the community, Haitian excellence, and all things that pertain to our communities. We felt that this, and as a result of COVID, we've really been addressing many of the issues from employees, employers' rights. We will be talking about seniors. We will be talking about issues pertaining to social services. We've been talking about unemployment, but we also felt that it was imperative to have this conversation about distant learning and the impact that it's having on our youth and community as a result of COVID-19. That being said, I would love to take this opportunity to allow each of our guests to introduce themselves and maybe a minute and a half about what they do and how they think this COVID-19 has affected our kids and just distant learning and the issues that our children are having in the community. So I'm going to start with Dr. Gerda Nicholas. Hi, Dr. Nicholas. You want me, baby?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I am super excited to be here with this amazing, talented group of people. You know, I keep saying when I grow up, I'm going to be like each one of you who's on everybody's seeing here. I am a clinical child and family psychologist by training. I'm a professor at University of Miami. Co-founded an organization called Rebâti Santé Mentale about, with some colleagues about 25 or more years ago. Been doing work, particularly mental health work in the Haitian community for the last 30 years since I've been a professor. Been doing a lot of work in Haiti. I'm in Haiti once a month, doing some of that work for the last 28 years. And so to me, participating in this conversation tonight is an opportunity to really think about the stresses that many of our young people are experiencing as a result of being home. And oftentimes for many of our young people, going to school is an opportunity to escape, some of the stressors. And now you have it compound there. In addition to that, and not being able to be linked to your friends and in a social way. We know how important social life is, even though in our Haitian community, but we also know that it's important to have a social life. And what does that mean when you're not able to do that, in a sort of physical way, in the same way? And then lastly, for many young people who are also experiencing a level of abuse, and oftentimes the abuse may be coming from home, and now you sort of like this idea of not being able to escape all of that is really, really hard. And I'm not even gonna tackle the idea that you can't have a prom the same way you're supposed to have a prom, or be thinking about visiting college campuses to get ready for your college, and so forth in the same way. It's just the stresses are compound, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity and to hear people's questions and to talk about ways that stress can impact your mental state. Therefore, that will have an absolute impact on your academic performance. So thank you for allowing me to be here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas. I know it's your crazy schedule. It's always an honor to have you, and thank you for always willing to join us. Sandra, please introduce yourself. I know you're one of the VSS. You're one of the S in the VSS, but tonight you're in a different capacity.
Hi, my name is Sandra Dennis. I am one of the second S in the VSS Hour. I am so excited to be here with you all. I also serve as the interim executive director of Miami Workers Center, and I'm the president and founder of Samsung. We wear many hats. We are phenomenal women. We are. I'm excited to be here to talk about some of the disparities that we will see come out of this, how it's already we're already seeing it, what's happening in terms of folks who can get tested, people who have access to distant learning, people who have internet, people who have multiple devices for their multiple children in their homes. So I want to dig deep in what that looks like for people who have multiple children in different ages, who may be essential workers because they work in fast food industries, they work in low-wage jobs in the hospital, and how they're not able to really be the homeschool teachers that a lot of us are fortunate to be right now. So I look forward to really digging deep into that. And thank you so much, Shirley, for hosting this. And a huge shout out to Vanessa, the big V in the VSS Hour.
Since you mentioned her, I was going to go straight into her. Madam V, can you please introduce yourself and your perspective for tonight?
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Joseph. I am an immigration attorney at Catholic Legal Services, and I suppose that's the hat I'll be wearing today.
All righty. Mr. Lopez, we have James Lopez with us.
Hey, y'all. My name is James Lopez. I'm really happy and excited to be on the call with you all to have this important conversation. I'm the executive director of an organization called Power U Center for Social Change, and we develop the leadership of working class youth of color here in Dade County and teach them how to organize to win policy reforms and changes that improve their communities and also their quality of education. And I think what I want to offer today is really just talk about what is something that we're going to see as part of the bigger picture and long term. I know we call this distant learning, but I think the reality is we say distance learning to make everyone feel calm and try to get people to be prepared, but we're in the midst of a crisis emergency education system, right? And now we're actually adjusting to an emergency crisis. So I wanted to kind of talk about what that may look like long term for both young people and families. And I also wanted to give people a context of what are some of the things that this could mean in the next 10 years from now, and what are some of the conversations you can have with your families, with your peers, where we can kind of come together and kind of address our ability to make some changes in an uncertain moment. So I'm excited to have this conversation with folks.
Great, thank you so much. And then we're going to turn over to something that's really been at the heart of a lot of the discussions lately. We're going to turn over to Ishmael Joseph, who, so Ishmael, I'll let you introduce yourself and the perspective that you bring to this conversation tonight.
Thank you so much for having me on this conversation. I just want to thank you three ladies. I mean, it's such a needed conversation and dialogue. My name is Ishmael Joseph. I'm a career specialist at Purdue University Global, and I'm also the founder and president of Student Life 101. And in essence, our organization provides alternative pathways that kind of help students to navigate through education, you know, helping them to understand their purpose personally, and of course, how that relates to it professionally. My perspective that I'm hoping to bring, and of course, to provide some insight on, is how does it look for those that are transitioning from, of course, high school or middle school to high school, and going out into their collegiate studies. I mean, the dynamics of our educational system have changed. I mean, the way James has articulated it, I mean, it's really, really a huge crisis. And the crisis is more than just, you know, the deep inequalities that it's not just devices and bandwidth that we're talking about, that are they're critically important, but it's also the skills to self-direct your learning. And of course, parents having the time to spend with their students helping. And what that means on the career services side when you're transitioning into college. I mean, you're talking about proms and college visits and tours that have changed, or admissions requirements that have changed. So how do we be able to have those kind of pressing conversations with those that are getting into their collegiate studies and, of course, going into their career paths? That's the perspective that I'm hoping to bring today. So thank you guys so much for having me, man. I'm excited.
Thank you. And then my good friend, Ezra. I wanted to have Ezra in this conversation because Ezra is going to deal with a perspective that I think is quite interesting. We are not sure if we're having after school programs, summer school programs. So Ezra, please introduce yourself and the body of work that you do, please.
Yes, well, hello to everyone. Thank you, ladies, for putting this together. My name is Ezra Gervais. I am the CEO of Baton Youth Services. So pretty much what we are a youth and family financial empowerment organization. I'm actually wearing one of my shirts, School to CEO Pipeline. We want to bring the awareness of, how school to prison pipeline is going to be greatly affected by what's happening right now, And not only that, I also do some work with Nova with Project Rise. So we're actually working with nonprofit organizations to figure out how can we utilize things like Zoom to be able to provide tutoring and other types of sessions or activities to keep kids busy during this time. So happy to be here.
And then lastly, I couldn't have this whole conversation with just us and not have a young person. So I want to introduce to you guys one of my mentees, Jency. Jency, what's your perspective? Tell us who you are, where you are in this process, and the other roles that you play as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to come and join on this platform with you guys. My name is Jency. I'm coming on as a senior at FIU, and also coming on as a big sister, actually witnessing my 7th grade sister and what she's going through as a student that's being affected by COVID-19. I think that you guys all have a lot of great perspectives to share from hearing your titles and everything. So I'm really glad that we're having the opportunity to discuss how this is going to affect our students, because I feel like it's going to affect me, it's going to affect my little sister, and even students we haven't even thought about down the line.
Thank you so much. So for our viewers that are watching, for people that may be on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever platform you're watching us on right now, as you can see, we really put thought into having the right people around the table to address the different perspectives. We want to look at this not just from a Miami-Dade or a Broward or Palm Beach County, because what's happening right now is not just locally. It's not just a matter of a state issue, it's a national issue, right? And indeed, I think James hit it right on the head. We are headed for an educational crisis. Many articles have already been written about the regressions that we're about to see. So I wanted to start with really what we do at U-Turn. So U-Turn Youth is we're a consultant firm that specializes in youth conflict resolution. So for us, it is imperative. We serve both parties. We serve the young people who are finding themselves in really tough situations, making risky behavior, participating in risky behaviors. And then we're working with educators, law enforcement, mental health, hospitals, any and everyone who has the opportunity to engage with young people. Our mission is to then come together and say, these are some of the backstories that you need to understand. These are some of the things that when we're making rules, when we're teaching, when we're engaging with the young person, there isn't a one cookie cutter for everyone. And we thought U-Turn, this was perfect, because even in this concept of distant learning, yes, the school systems have done a great job trying to give as many kids as possible tablets, trying to give access to internet as much as possible. But there are so many hindrances and barriers that still makes learning not a priority, right? So that is the reason why U-Turn launched Stay Home, Log On, because we're already home, right? So we really wanted to play on a lot of the stay home that everybody else is doing. But then we started sitting in these meetings, we started realizing what was happening with many of the youth that we're serving that are saying, I haven't done homework since, school was shut down. Instantly, we didn't want to address the issue from the now, but we wanted to address the issue, what will this look like a year from now? What's the conversations that we're gonna be having April of next year? We host a teen chat as well, where one young person said to us, well, I'm gonna pass anyway. There's no big deal, I'm gonna pass. The governor said I'm gonna pass. There's no standardized testing. I don't need to do it. And anyone who's following our campaign, I think we have a post that says, you pass now, you may fail next year. So I really wanted to start the conversation with looking at the bigger picture that will eventually impact the smaller picture. So I'm gonna turn to Sandra and her expertise about the real backstory, the inequities that we're seeing right now, the disparities that are becoming so readily available from the health, the wealth, the education. I think, Sandra, what are some of the disparities that you're mostly concerned about? And again, this is a conversation, so I'm really hoping that everybody will engage when necessary. And then immediately after that, I'd like to turn to James a little bit to continue that conversation that Sandra will be on. Sandra?
Sure, absolutely. I think we want to start with, we already know that a lot of the students that we're talking about already come from come from disenfranchised communities. So we know that they already go to schools that are already under-resourced, that they may have started school behind where their counterparts have started. So we know that in terms of the amount of words that they knew when they started kindergarten, they weren't ready. We know that they weren't tested on grade in third grade. We know that for a lot of students, there may not necessarily be on what we would call the standard for their grade already. So when you think about that context, we already know that when students are out of school for 6 to 7 months, and we're talking about a backslide or regression, we know that our students are already the most vulnerable, right? And so because we already have schools that are already low resource, we already know that their classes are overpopulated, we already know what's going on in our communities, we can already expect that this will also make sure that these disparities get even bigger. So when you think about who will not be ready for the next classes, who can't afford a tutor, who can't afford a nanny to stay with them, who, because their parents speak a different language, will never ever have someone really help them with these assignments, whose parents won't get the information because they're at work all day trying to make sure that, the money that they lost, they're bringing it in somehow. We already know that these are the students that we're talking about. So not how sometimes we want to make it a one size fit all, but for the students who already have been disenfranchised, how do we make sure that we're talking about equity and not equality? That, if they need a little bit more support, it might not only be like you're giving a tablet, but are you offering them, funding for tutors? Are you offering them, more support that they would actually need? So I'm going to kind of turn it over to my friend James to kind of chime in, because I think that's really the work that Power U does. And I'm so excited to be on the panel with you because I know y'all are doing amazing things.
Thank you, Sandra. I mean, you kind of hit it spot on. I mean, the only thing that I would add is, one thing that we've seen just watching the crisis play out is that there's been decades of lack of investment in our healthcare system, where we actually just can't deal with the huge level of need in this moment, right? And that's just been an intentional lack of investment in just our public health system. The same is going to happen in our public education system. We've seen over the past decades a lack of investment in really developing and investing our public education system, where at least in the state of Florida, our education system was already so underfunded, so under-resourced and short-staffed that they could barely deal with students who have the most need in our communities even before this pandemic, right? So we're going to actually see that just like our healthcare crisis, there's going to be a huge educational gap that we might not be able to sort of deal with without significant mobilizations and demanding that there is an increase in public education in the way that Sandra talks about, right? Not just a conversation around tech, but it's, do we actually have additional staff, additional supports to address the whole family? And I think the last thing that I would say around that is, this is also a time where it highlights that however people feel about education, however people felt about teachers, this moment has highlighted that schools are really the anchor of our community. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at what institution, what entity has been able to meet a significant amount of the demand, it's been the school district, right? Yeah. There's been a whole bunch of support for organizations, churches, service providers are really stepping up in this moment. And a lot of people are really depending on a school district that can meet, upwards to 800,000, feed up to 800,000 families in a matter of weeks. And I think that just highlights that however people felt about the investment of public education, really this crisis highlights that we really need to put sort of our actions behind our words.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask James to kind of talk about how our school system in Florida is rated maybe 50 out of 50. We're not as worse as Mississippi, but at the bottom of the list in terms of funding. You want to say a little bit about that? I don't know the actual stat.
Yeah, we are ranked at the bottom of state funding into our public education system. So many of the people that we're working with are underpaid teachers. Even with the bump this past year, people are not getting paid what they're worth. Mental health providers are understaffed. You really just don't actually see the support that we need, particularly in working class Black neighborhoods and brown neighborhoods. And I just think it's more of the same of people saying that education is not a right, it's a choice. We should put, it's all up to the parent to decide. And we actually see it's not only, in my opinion, it's a grossly irresponsible way to view society, because if we don't take care of all of our children, we're going to continue to have problems, even if we take care of our own individual family.
Dr. Nicholas?
Since you said this was going to be a conversation, I just want to add one thing to this conversation, because I think what both Sandra and James has highlighted is about how important systems are and what happens when you have a breaking in systems. But when the Black and brown kids fail school, nobody will say the system was broken. People will say the individual was deficit. Yeah. We will talk about what's wrong with the individual kids, but not necessarily the systems that are being in place. Many of us here come from neighborhoods and families where it was rough, right? To be able to make it. We come from some pretty rough systems. So we also know that kids have an amazing level of resources, in terms of their strengths and resiliency, that we also need to be able to tap into, as we also help everybody understand that the issues that kids may be faced is not a deficit in the kids, but a deficit in the systems in which they operate in, and oftentimes fails them. And I really want to make sure that we also, because this moment in time, as James was saying, when people look at this in a couple of years and they're going to take a look and see, why are these particular types of kids didn't make it to college? Why did not they graduate? Why did they not have the grades? People will look and say something was wrong with them. Something was wrong with their parents. Something was wrong with the neighborhood in which they grew up. But nobody will take a look and say, to what extent was the system, wasn't built well to begin with? And when you end up with a state of a crisis like we are in, it is likely then to fail the most vulnerable within that system. Right?
Can I go in and chime into that with Dr. Nick? With you, that I'm seeing the effects of that and how it bleeds into our higher education system. I've been a admissions advisor, education advisor, career specialist. So I've kind of seen the full cycle of what happens when a student comes into the university and how they matriculate throughout the university. And to be honest with you, that passing along that student, so to speak, that might have some issues, and we're looking at that individual as opposed to the whole system, it's the same thing that bleeds into the higher education system as well. We do that same type of thing. We kind of just pass them along. And if they have an issue, then we blame that particular individual as opposed to the resources that need to be provided from a higher educational standpoint. I'll give you an example of a student that in admissions that came in, and he had some, second English wasn't his first language. He was his first language was some foreign language. And he literally went through an entire master's in psychology program and got to the end of the program where he had to facilitate and come through with what we consider as a comprehensive exam. And that exam is like 10 pages. And reading the student's exam, you can see grammatical errors from the first page. So again, that type of, let's deal with the student, let's not deal with just the individual and saying that the individual has an issue. Let's look at how the system is set up to not really be cohesive to our students and helping them to transition. So I'm seeing it bleed into our higher education system as well too. So I'm glad we're having this type of conversation and dialogue.
I'd like to bring.
Sorry, Shirley. I just wanted to say that I mean, I often think about, and I said it yesterday on the show, there are critical grades that you learn foundational information in. And so if you're in third grade, if you're in fifth going to sixth, if you're in eighth grade going to high school, there are things that are building that you have to build upon in order to, if you don't have that baseline, you will never learn this stuff, or you'll be lost. I remember faked that I knew my multiplication table in my fifth grade. I really had to be like, Tantra, you have to learn this. And I knew, and my mom knew I was struggling because I didn't know my multiplication table as much as I said I did. And so like, if folks are missing this whole quarter or 2/3 or 2/4 of, let's say, the last half of third grade, how do they make it through division? And they start to pick up what all the other things that you can pick up in the next grades to come. And so it's great to say they'll pass right now, but what happens in fourth grade? What happens in fifth grade when they miss the whole last half of their third grade? And third grade is special to me because that's when I learned that teachers are everything, and it was not a gift that was given to me. But I just wanted to share that as well.
That's a good point. I want to bring Vanessa into this conversation because we're also realizing that many of the kids that are not logging on right now, or whether they're logging on or not, or really engaging with the system. And what I mean by engaging, they're turning in assignments, they're completing, they're actually engaging in the learning process. We're realizing that it is low income communities and communities that are either undocumented or are in very precarious legal statuses, which is really up your alley. And I really want you to address that because that's a backstory that as we have these conversations, I'm often saying to people, a hungry kid don't care about ABC and 1, 2, 3. And a kid that's worried about whether or not their families are going to be home when they get home because of the tension in the community, and they're watching the news about deportation and immigration, that kid is not worried, like Sandra just said, about 2 times 2. So we're finding out now, again, the systems, it's catching up with us because the kids that are suffering the most are especially the undocumented, and that digital divide is seemingly even more. That divide seems to be growing into an even greater gap. V?
I think with a lot of immigrant families or folks who do not have status here within the United States, the problem is common regardless of the time, right? So if folks' basic needs aren't met, generally we know that they won't be able to accomplish, whatever other goal that we believe people at their level should be doing. A basic need for somebody who does not have documentation is that documentation, because that is what they feel will allow them to be able to navigate through society without having any issues. The problem with that is the fact that when you now take on COVID-19, the coronavirus, a whole entire pandemic that is happening, and you add that to a family that is already, I guess like crumbling at the seams with issues around their status, what you get is a household that's, unable to actually navigate processes that we would assume are simple, but we are now realizing are not. I mean, if it's very difficult for somebody who does not have documentation to want to interact with any sort of authority figure. And that's as simple as somebody's teacher, your child's teacher. You don't want to go to the school. Some parents who do not have documentation do not even enroll their own child in school. What they'll do is have a family member who is documented that they're living with, or is a neighbor or whomever, act as that child's guardian. Now, if that's what's happening, you're not getting the information. And you have you have almost no incentive to want to volunteer any of your contact information for somebody to be able to now contact you about this kid's laptop. You do not want to receive any emails because you don't know who's paying attention to that, who is going to find out that you don't have documentation. So for so many reasons, or for so many different entities, you choose not to engage with them voluntarily. Now, add to the fact that now, not only do you not have documentation, you have this fear of authority, but you do not speak the language, or the language is not your maternal language. Well, what happens there? any information that comes out, you do not understand. Whether you speak Haitian Creole or Quiche, you know, you won't understand what is actually being said to you. And even when, right, you understand or have a notion of what is being told to you, you don't know how to use the technology, because where you come from, that technology was not available, and you did not receive any training. If folks who are, you know, documented, speak English, and are engaged in their children's learning are saying that they're having a hard time with what is happening here right now, why are we so surprised that, you know, folks who are in precarious situations with their immigration status here would not have these problems? I think that another thing that we need to consider is that, you know, immigrant families don't navigate processes the same way. And so a lot of our information is gotten secondhand. So the school may put something out and then you hear it on the radio or your child tells you what happens. The literal translation of, you know, school is closed in Creole means that it's closed. That's it. They don't say anything else. And even to an average person, school being closed, all right, school's closed, school's over, right? But in your language, that may not be what you're meant to receive. And so even when we are translating these things, we're not translating them in ways that the person who's receiving them could capture the essence of what is really trying to be said. How do you tell somebody to log on, right? So you have to tell them to connect to something. You have to use words that people are going to understand what you're the message that you're actually trying to get across. And of course, children, we know, like the studies show that when a parent or somebody in the household is affected by their immigration status, if the child knows that there's, you know, deportation is a possibility, if they know that their parent is not where everybody else's parents are in terms of legal status, that has a significant effect on them, because what their priority now is, I want to stay with my parents. And to have children talk about that with children is very difficult. It's a very difficult conversation to have with them because they completely understand what it means to be deported. And I think that with when they're looking at the administration that we have currently, and we look at the proclamations that are coming out, the declarations, the things that this administration, the things that they're saying, and the proclamation that he just came out with, that would scare anybody who doesn't understand how to read into that. And so I think that, you know, we often think that what we're doing right now is educating kids, but we forget that we're educating kids through a pandemic. And so this is not school. And I think it's unfair to really call it distance learning or try to make it seem like it's something normal, because it really isn't. And because we're doing that, we're not acknowledging what these children are actually going through. And so I'll stop there.
Great points, Vanessa. So I want to add, and I'm doing this intentionally, I want to add Ezra in, because as we talk about these conversations, a lot of our young people tend to turn to after-school programming, mentors, and other places as outlets, right? To get some of these fears, to feel safety, for food, for help. I can tell you that as it relates to any type of learning environment, after-school programs carry one of the biggest loads because they're the ones helping with these assignments, right? So not having that, Ezra, I'd really like you to speak to that, because you have been the director of quite a bit of them. You've run some programs, and then I'd like for us to kind of turn it over to Dr. Nicholas to kind of bring this all together. So now we're talking about immigration. We're talking about, you know, the many different, what do we call them, disparities that exist, the college perspective, all of these things. How is it as a people that we're expected to move forward, whether it's the kid, the parent, the teacher that's doing the teaching, that's a parent as well? So we've got to address all of that, and I'd like for Dr. Nicholas to do that, and then I'll come back to Jency. And please, if you guys have any questions, again, it's a conversation, so jump on in. Ezra, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so basically, okay, here's the typical day of a student on a regular school day, right? So generally, the parent would drop them off school. They would have breakfast at school. They would get instructions, they would have lunch. After they are let go, they either would get picked up by by transportation provided by the after school program, or the parent will drop them off to the after school program. That after school program that are funded by various funders like the Children's Trust and etc. They would provide snacks. They would provide a tutor for that child to be able to help them with their homework. They would have different type of programming from, evidence-based curriculums. They will be in a safe environment till around 5:36, 6:30 until they're picked up by their parents. So, I mean, from school to after school program, you're talking about a piece, because of this pandemic, is missing from a parent that is either a single mom or a single parent that has to go to one job in the morning and another job in the afternoon. So now that from 7:30 to around 6:30, they got to figure it out on their own. They have to make money for the household if they haven't lost their jobs, and make sure that their kids are fed breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and have, some type of knowledge to help them with their homework. So when you're talking about after school programs, they are getting hit hard. Even some after school programs are still trying to do as much as they can with technologies to provide some type of distant learning or provide tutoring for students. But, it's kind of difficult to be able to provide at one point, tutoring for, a group of 20 to 25 kids in a room. You can kind of go back and forth. It's very difficult to do that on Zoom. It's very difficult to do that, through, some type of device. So that creates a hectic environment. And it is really showing and is really exposing that we have an issue within our community. We need to find a way to support these parents. So, I mean, that's something that we definitely need to address. Even when this pandemic is over, what do we do to support parents to make sure that our kids are learning and progressing?
So I want to, Ezra, you hit on a very valid point, and I'm going to lead right into Dr. Nicholas. Just by a show of hands, how many of us are actual parents on this Zoom? Vanessa, you a parent too?
Sandra's not my child.
Ooh.
So,
that's my big. All this knowledge, where do you think she got it from?
That's
right.
right.
Okay, came from you, mommy. So I have one child. Ezra has 2 boys, and if I'm not mistaken, Ish has 3. Vanessa has 1, who's sitting there.
Who's fully grown.
Fully grown. Dr. Nicholas has 2. I will take, how they say, when you point your finger, you got 3 pointing back at you, like the kids say. Listen, I am overwhelmed, and I am fully capable. And when we talk about fully capable, I'm talking about being able to navigate, the technological device, being able to navigate the many different platforms, because it's one thing to log on, but then it's a whole nother ballgame to be able to navigate the iReady, the math program, then something else you got going on. So even if a parent could do one, now you're asking me to navigate all these other systems that I have no clue what they are, right? So I say this to say, I have a first grader. Let me tell y'all, the homework that's coming home for the first grader that starts at 8 o'clock in the morning and goes to 3 p.m. Some days I want to pull all my dreads out. So I can only imagine how Ishmael is doing.
With the baby.
Listen.
And your wife is a teacher.
Yo, listen.
A teacher.
Me and Ezra were just having this conversation. Can you imagine a typical household? I have 3 children, 2 that are in school, 9 and 7, and a 1-year-old that's like under 2 feet, and you just can't find her. And my wife is also a second grade teacher. So all these voices are happening in the house. So she's trying to teach while having to teach my children, because I work from home and I work online. So now we're having this new dynamic that's changing. And I can only imagine, I'm being honest with you guys, the mental stress that it takes upon us as parents. I mean, You talking about getting the kids some help? Somebody need to put me on a chair and let me
Yes.
dispel all my issues. Because
Dr.
it's
Nicholas,
real.
please.
It's real. Dr. Nicholas, I need you. I'm gonna get your card. We need to link up because
we need a couple sessions.
and I'm serious. It's a serious issue. My wife tutors kids, and I'll go as far as to saying that even some of the children that she's tutoring, the parents are just blessed just to have her because that 1 hour that she's tutoring is a 1 hour nap that these parents don't get. And she's tutoring frontline workers, the children's of frontline workers, offering tutoring services to those particular parents. So all of us parents are feeling this, man, and we're having to be homeschooled, and then the refrigerator stays open 24/7. Let me not even. I'm just.
Okay,
I want to say one. I want to say one point. One point, real quick before Dr. Nicholas goes on. Listen, what I tell parents: the hardest child to tutor is your own kids, because you know I can tutor millions of kids. I have more patience. Like just I don't know where it's coming from, but my child.
I ain't
Like,
got it.
hold on, you don't know how to spell door? Wait, hold on, that's two O. That's two O's. What? Like, you just get so frustrated. Like, yes, we need help, doctor. We need help.
Dr. Nicholas, although this conversation is about the distant learning, right?
Yes.
I really need you to address what the overwhelming feeling that the parents are going through, the children themselves, because a lot of parents don't want to ask for help, right? Because so now you have this question of pride that's kicking in as well, especially in a lot of minority communities, okay? You have a lot of things that are being highlighted. Parents that may not know how to read, that may not know how to do this. So there's a lot that's being exposed right now in this pandemic that's causing additional stress to the loss of jobs, the loss of all of this. So please tell us, how do we work with the parents, the kids, the teachers that are the parents? How do we work through all this?
So so I think the very first thing, which is like we kind of laugh about it, but it's an acknowledgement of the fact that this is real, right? Like the stress is real, and being able to call your friend Israel and Ezra to get on the phone and said, somebody come and get them kids, or I'm ready. You know, all of that is really, really important because the stress is real for all of our parents, right? And we want to pay attention to that because it's in about 5 to 10 years that we're going to see the effects of that stress in your body and in your immune system. Because we know very well that stress and fear and anxiety and these things significantly impact your immune system. And when it impacts your immune system, it makes you more vulnerable to catch all kinds of stuff, right? And so the paying attention to it, because we might be saying, well, I'm just stressed. But we have to realize that that stress every single moment and every day is causing havoc in your inside. And it's doing the same thing on your kids inside that we ourselves don't get a chance to see until it starts showing up on outside of our skin. And then we're like, why am I breaking down? Why do I have this thing, right? But it's because all of that's been working itself on the inside. So we have got to find ways to develop some strategies to gérer, to address. But 9 VSS hour, you parle créole un moment, you parle anglais un autre moment. You never know in the VSS hour. And it really is important that we find ways to really, really, really manage the stress for our kids and for ourselves. We have a mental health task force, and we're gonna run these webinars every Thursday at 7:30 from now until June. And they're going to really be addressing lots of things like loss and grief is coming up on Thursday. We're going to be talking about just kids' overall mental wellness. What should parents be doing? We're going to talk about the parents' mental. We're going to talk about violence in the home, because not only are you frustrated with your kid, but you know that love of your life that you thought for sure that you and your boo were so connected, and love of my life. And now that love of your life is getting in your last nerve. And you just like, when can it go away? So that also is real, right? As well. And we have to pay attention, because it means that relationships are being redefined. Roles will have to be redefined. So paying attention to these things is really, really important. one of the things we're talking about, all of this thing calls for us to really have a much more systemic way of thinking about things. What do I mean by that? Many of the things that Ismail's talking about and Ezra's talking about and all of you are talking about, from my perspective, says we cannot afford to take a child and look at a child in isolation. So we have to use our ecological model that allows us the opportunity to see the child from a microsystem, and that is just the immediate environment in which they are in, to the chronosystem, which is the larger change over time. So we talk about the microsystem, my immediate environment. We talk about the mesosystem, which is all of the things that are happening in my neighborhood, in my community. We talk about the exosystem. So like the ecological framework, and if you're paying attention tonight, you could just Google right now, because I know how all of you like Google. Nobody's gonna like trying to remember, because like you're like, this is not school, I'm not gonna remember this. So you go in and you put like ecological framework, and it's gonna show you a wonderful model, and it tells us that kids and people must be understood within that larger systemic and ecological framework, because we have got to understand what happens when politicians get together on the news and deliver messages, and how that could affect somebody. Why is listening to the president for a moment can cause you all kinds of stress, right, related to that? So we have to talk about the larger social. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to be political, but I can't help it. But like you have to pay attention to the larger social and cultural changes and things that are happening in our lives that are also can be impacting us, no matter what you're doing at home. So you're doing all these wonderful things at home, but you put on the news and the news is pissing you off, and that also gets your stress going, right, as well. So it is important that as we're thinking about the kinds of interventions and the things that we need to do, we must have a systemic approach and look at the various systems in which kids are embedded in and what kind of change they need in order for us to be effective.
I think that's totally on point, Dr. G, because I always talk about how, including in immigration, you have to treat the whole person. To treat somebody's immigration status is one thing, but what about healthcare? Why aren't we demanding that folks have access to healthcare? All of the little components that make up a person, we need to address. And I think it's the exact same for children, and we're not doing enough of that. And I think this pandemic has shown us how much more important it is that we actually do that for these young people.
And I think a lot of this, really, I'm so sorry, Sandra. I think
that's sweet.
Opening our eyes to realize that despite having all of these programs in place, I feel like they've come from a perspective of like, it's already too late and now we need to help them. So hopefully this kind of opens our eyes to think about more of the before and focusing on how are we going to help prevent these students to reach such a low point. I wanted to touch up on what Vanessa said earlier about the immigration. I'm actually privileged that my sister doesn't have to deal with the things that I dealt with when I was younger. I had to deal with reading these legal documents that I had no idea what they even meant. But now my sister only has to worry about her school. And that's a good thing, because that's what you want your kids to focus on all the time. And I think that like the immigration part just comes on as like a weight that they don't really understand. So we try to like leave them out of it. But I know that in a household where that's not possible, they feel that stress from their parents. And then now it's coming on to them even harder because they feel the stress of having to be at school, but not really being at school. And I think that I hope that this kind of just lets us know that these students are not coming to school with just the thought of, okay, I'm at school, what do I have to do today? They're coming to school with the thoughts of what did they leave at home? And possibly they couldn't even leave it at home. They also brought it to school with them.
Right. I was going to say that I think that's such a valid point, and this is why we always and thank you, Shirley, because it's always important to have a youth perspective. I was going to say that there was some talk about parenting parents and what they're experiencing, I also think that their dynamics in being in a confined space together for such long periods of time. And, you know, researchers have done it, scientists have done it. When animals are put in a confined space for long periods of time, they go wild. They try to destroy each other. You can only imagine folks who don't have spare rooms, where their children are sharing rooms, where they're sharing devices, where they got to share a remote control, how much pressure. And for, you know, I can speak for Haitian community, a lot of that, we don't take it seriously. We think, you know, those kids, they don't have no real stress. But that can be very stressful as a child, to go a whole day and not to be able to watch your show because your big brother got control of it. So these are the little things that really have impacts on younger folks. Someone on the comments talk about, what about younger kids? These little things show up, and we have to take it very seriously and really, you know, dig a little bit deeper to see how this might be showing up for them. It might not necessarily be, they can express that they're depressed or that they're frustrated, but we should be looking to how it can be impacting them right now as well.
And I think that
hold on, James. James, I know you've been waiting for a minute, and then I'll come back to you, Jency. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, no, I think the sort of only thing that I would add to kind of build on what Dr. Nicholas said around thinking around the entire ecology of our society, right? Not just the individual person, is that we have been told for so long that there's not enough money to meet the basic needs of everyday people here. There's not enough money to properly fund schools. And if you look at the way the federal government has responded in the form of a $12 trillion sort of stimulus plan, just to give somebody, just to kind of wrap, the only brief thing I would say to give people perspective on how much $12 trillion is, right, is that you could have been able to pay every single worker here in the US their year's wage of 2019.
Watch yourself, James. Watch yourself.
That's the first thing, right? I'm talking about numbers. I'm not talking about policy per se.
That's right.
In terms of the numbers, if you were to take $12 trillion, you can pay every single worker a year's lump sum of what they made in 2019. You can then pay off every single student loan debt that exists in the country, and you would still have $5 trillion left over for companies.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And that money was already given out.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So if there's one thing I want folks to think about, whether you are in a nonprofit, whether you are a student, whether you are a teacher, that there actually there's no real reason why we can't fund the things that we desperately need, because that money is clearly there. It's just the people who are making decisions around cutting the check are intentionally telling us that it's never in the pocketbook. How are you going to afford it? We got food at home, right? But that money goes to corporations, right? So it's just something I want folks to think about, where our public education system can actually be fully funded to really meet the whole need of our neighborhoods.
I wanted to quickly touch on what Sandra said, because, we're talking about how folks react, the interpersonal relationships, for kids, especially younger kids, the stress manifests itself physically in the child, right? And so we know that when a child may be depressed, maybe they say they have a stomach ache or their head hurts, or they'll point to something physical because they don't know how to articulate those feelings. And a lot of times that's dismissed in an immigrant household, right? We're told that we don't know what those feelings are. You don't have stress, so your head cannot possibly be hurting you because you have no stress. I'm paying all the bills, I'm doing this. And don't forget that in immigrant households, the more we are seen in the house, the more we are given to do. So the moment that your parents looking at you and you look like you're not doing anything, and maybe you're sitting in front of the computer doing your work, or maybe you're studying something on the side,
you're not busy.
You're not busy. Sometimes you gotta get up and go wash the dishes.
You're not busy.
You gotta go make the bed. You gotta go clean this, clean
Watch
that.
yourself, Vanessa.
Go get your trash. Listen, I'm old now. They can't tell me nothing. But those are the things that we also dismiss that a child is going through. So we want them to log on, but it may be in their home. It looks like you're playing games, And so we have to, I think those are the things that providers like yourselves have to consider. You know, what is that child going through at home? Okay, we can talk to the child could do what they can, but then the parent sees it a completely different way. So
I'd like to add to exactly what Vanessa just said. So we did a teen chat in partnership with North Miami. And the very first thing, and Ishmael was on it with us, right? And we were really talking about the issues that seniors are having, right? And every senior on that call said their biggest problem with being home was the fact that although they've got this mounting amount of work, parents have added the chore to the chores, right? Wash the dish. Oh, if I was just responsible for the dishes, now I'm doing the laundry. I'm taking care of the little sister. I'm helping the little sister with her homework, making sure the baby sister's taken care of. And they're sitting here like no one is really understanding the pressure that we're under. And that was an important point for us because as they prepare for their tomorrow, they have concerns. Look at where they're at right now. No real, everything that they planned for. There's no prom. So granted, now we've got 2. There's no prom, no grad bash. There's no hanging out with the homies. So now you have a virtual graduation. They got to come back for an actual graduation. And then you had many of them that were just concerned, period.
Yeah.
I may be starting school virtually. I've never walked into this college before. Now I'm going to be expected to, to produce in an environment I don't know, I don't understand, and there's no one to help me. So there are some real stressors that's happening to our seniors. And I think I'm going to let, before I turn over to Dr. Lickers, I'm going to let Ish talk about that a little bit because I think his perspective with the youth, with the seniors, the number one thing they said to us was, thank you for at least asking how we're doing. Because everybody just felt, I think we had about 7 or 8 of them that we were talking to, and everyone said, no one has bothered to ask us how we're doing in the pandemic. Now, granted, that may go back to a lot of the things we talk about culturally. Right? Kids don't have sentiment. As long as I give you food, I give you clothes, I give you a house, you're good to go. But there are some real issues that they're feeling. So, Ish, you want to talk to that for a little bit before I turn to Dr. Nicholas?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. But that chat was very eye-opening. I mean, to have our seniors, or majority of those that were seniors, and even Jency was on that conversation, being a senior in college, that statement alone, it was heart-wrenching to hear that our seniors are saying, thank you so much for asking how we're doing. I mean, like we said, with this whole educational system, how it's just changed. The COVID has changed the entire system when it comes up to something as simple as visiting a college, right? So the college tours have changed. I was just in a seminar with NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges Employers. And we're talking about now transitioning into more virtual internships and virtual webinars, or even going online when it comes up to their first year of college. I mean, the effects it's going to have upon our students is tremendous for those students that are just now learning how to do this distance learning thing. I see it. I mean, where I work as a career specialist, I work for Purdue University Global, and where I work, everything is remotely online. So it's either you learn it or you fall along the wayside, right? So now we're having to force that same type of educational system into our seniors, who may have already had in their mindset, hey, I'm going to a physical campus, a brick and mortar, so to speak, for me to engage with my other classmates, engage with colleagues, and engage with my teachers. So I can only imagine what kind of effect this is going to have in the higher education system. I mean, they're already vamping up. I mean, we're going through that webinar with NACE. I mean, it's a quick vamp up now that they're getting ready to really start pushing out the idea of going remotely for the first year of college. And that really has a daunting effect on a lot of our students. Now, on the other side, when it comes up to our students that are transitioning out of college, like yourself, Jency, that's going into the workforce, what kind of effect does it have upon you guys? Now we're talking about having virtual interviews. If you're not prepared adequately, right, to know how to conduct a virtual interview, these types of conversations we need to start having even with our seniors, because now seniors that are transitioning and have to go through an admissions process of an interview, they need to know the skills to have this admissions interview online, not even physically or in front of an actual admissions representative let alone going out into the workforce and having these virtual interviews. So I'm seeing the effect in the higher education system. And again, to mitigate it, I'm glad we're having this conversation and these types of conversations with our students now. And I'll say this last point with Ezra. Him and I were having this conversation before we got on this line, and we were saying, well, what is the solution? I mean, where do we go from here? And we talked about the power of our direct and indirect influence, right? Each and every one.
Hold up. You moving too quick for me. We get into solutions in a minute. See, that's what I like. You put a pause right there on that solution. I'm coming right back to you on that solution. Put a pause. Sandra, go ahead. Put a pause. Yeah. Go ahead, Sandra.
Ismail, I know you were going there. We'll come back. I just wanted to say that, virtual interviews, we know that biases exist, right? And I think that a lot of things that get us in the door is because people don't see us. They don't hear our voices. So I just want to be very mindful that there are certain folks who may have gotten in on paper, but from a virtual interview, we still know we live in a very biased country. The other thing that I would add is I always struggle with virtual classes. I don't feel as if I learned as much than when I'm sitting in a class. And that's a lot of students experience, that some folks can do well virtually. Some folks just don't do well virtually. They need to be in a class setting. They need to take physical notes. And I just want to be careful that while people, especially the folks who are graduating from high school, there's already a learning curve when you get to college, because you go from studying for one chapter to studying for 10 and exams for 10 chapters all at once. So a lot of folks, that's already a rocky time. But to be doing that virtually without the wraparound services that on campus can provide to you all can be very tricky. I mean, I was very, let's say, grateful that I got into an amazing university who really wrapped around great services around me on campus physically. I can go to folks' offices. I can meet with people who look like me. I can establish relationship with my peers. That's going to be really hard to do virtually in a new college that you may not know people. So I'm very fearful.
That's a very good point, Sandra, because we also know that many of our young people graduate. They were behind when they graduated. Imagine coming into these schools. I don't know how many young people I had going into college that ended up spending so many of their first year taking remedial courses, right? So imagine a child that wasn't prepared. Now they're going to be taking this remedial course that probably required a little bit more one-on-one, and they have to do that online. There's also a question of empathy that we have to be very mindful of, right? So your teacher, that interaction between a teacher that sees the light in you because of what you're able to bring, and you may not be able to catch up, but they see it and they're able to empathize and coach you through a technological device. A lot of that is lost, right? So I also want to make a comment before I turn to Dr. G. Sandra, V, if there are any comments online that you guys feel we need to address, or questions that are popping up, please feel free. Dr. Nicholas, to you, I saw your hand up.
Wait, Shirley, 1 second. Sorry, Dr. Nicholas, before we change the subject, I think you hit a really good point, Dr. Shirley and Sandra. I think that after this is all over, there's going to be this period of time where we're still going to have to be empathetic even after this is over, because there are students that are going to be coming into college for the first time, even though they've already been in college virtually. And then even with these virtual internships, if they happen to land someone a job after the internship is over, they still have to go through the process again. And I think that right now, we don't realize it, but we're going through a tough time. But even after this is over, all of these resources that we provide, we can't stop there, because we're going to go through a period of time again where it's going to be it's like putting training wheels on all over again.
Absolutely.
And James already told us that they got money.
Yeah.
There's money for it. The resources are here. So
I think that, Jenzy, your point was really, really important. And I was like, I thought I could I was like, I'm going to try to put my face in this camera and talk to the young people out there who might be watching this. So I feel like I'm going to have a conversation with Jenzy to say, the reality is adults don't really know what they're doing at this particular moment. And we have to be really honest and clear on that. So we have parents who are now have to be teachers at home and they've never taught before.
Never.
Actually, I'm from a school of education. That's what we do. We teach people on how to be educators. So the parents don't know how to be educators. So they're trying to be teachers. So we're gonna put that in quotes. They're trying to be teachers at home, and and doing their best. We're gonna give them the shout out. They're doing their best, and it will be good for the parents to be able to say, "Baby, I don't know what you at. I don't know anything, but it's okay. I'm here for you, and we're gonna try to work it out. We're gonna try to figure this out together." Instead of the parents trying to make it look like you actually remember algebra, you don't remember algebra. It's been a while since you took algebra,
and you learned it differently in a different country.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So it's good for you to just say, "I don't really know," but we're gonna try and figure this out. That's number one. Number two, we're talking about teachers that comes from an education system that never prepared them to actually be in such a pandemic. So from the teacher's standpoint, it is assuming that all the stuff you were going to do for me in class, I'm going to do exactly the same thing at home, without recognizing that now that you're home, that you as a high schooler, as a college student, as a middle schooler who's home, is not only just home now to do homework, but you're also doing homework as well. The teacher doesn't understand that. So they just know, just like I as a professor think, the only class that you have is mine. The only one you care about is mine. Of course, I can pile up the work on you. So we didn't prep our professors and our teachers to actually be able to do that. So my liberation with my students is when I show up and says, "I don't know what I'm doing either on this online thing, but we're gonna try to make it work for each other, during this particular moment." So we have to stop pretending that we know what we're doing in the middle of a crisis when none of us know what we're really doing in the midst of this particular crisis. So I think that liberation on ourselves and helping and making sure that the young people know that we don't know, there's some things I don't know and you don't know, I think becomes really, really important. The last point I'll say is that as human beings, we are ritualistics. We like things to happen in a particular way. We get up, you know exactly what you're gonna do. You go to school. That's why I have a class, and the most messed up things I could do to my students is when I shift the chairs around. They're like, oh, you moved my chair. I was like, no, that chair didn't belong to you, right? But the reason for that is because they sit in exactly the same spot for the whole entire thing, right? And so forth, because they're like rituals. People like that. So when our rituals are off, it's gonna throw us off. When we don't have the rituals of graduation, where I get a chance to get the yearbook and you sign the yearbook and I get to hug you goodbye and I swear to God, you're gonna be my friend forever and ever and ever, all of that. When we don't get a chance to go through all of that, it's going to cause us pain. And we as adults must recognize that it's not so small, because it's throwing us off in our rituals, in the ways that we used to be able to do things. So the next phase for us is, how do I deal with life knowing very well I don't know what to come tomorrow? That I may be having breakfast for dinner instead of breakfast for breakfast in the same way that I used to, right? Being able to do. And that's that kind of sort of like the resiliency aspects in terms of our abilities to be flexible, our abilities not to be so rigid, that is gonna help all of us get to this particular crisis that we are in.
That's a great, go ahead, Tracy.
I know that you guys are parents as adults, but I kind of almost rose my hand, because even though I am 21 and I feel like I have a child, like literally my 13-year-old sister, I have to sometimes pretend I'm either the cool big sister or I'm the second mom, because my mom does not understand the 50 emails that the teacher sent out. My mom doesn't understand that every time that like a school day passes by, she's going to get that call for the child to log on. And she asks me, is she logging on? And I'm like, yes, they're calling everyone, don't worry. So it's a little bit stressful. So I agree that you guys are going through a tough time, but don't worry because I'm there with you because not even I remember surface area from 7th grade. Like, no, my major is public relations. I do not remember surface area for the life of me. Like, it's okay. You know, it's really okay that you, and I'm actually glad to see that you guys are expressing this. Because I hope that this gives a deeper appreciation for teachers because, man, they go through a lot. They teach multiple children in one day, 5 days a week. Like, it's ridiculous. But I really just wanted to hit one last thing was the thing about like graduation. I just that one really touches my heart because I'm a first generation student and I can't imagine what it feels like to not be able to walk across the stage. Like I don't even want to think about that, but it's just so big, like especially in undocumented families. Like you see your child walking across the stage, you know, you don't really know what it means. It just means they did a good thing in school, you know. But I just hope that these parents still realize that despite the students aren't walking across the stage, they still did all the hard work that you're supposed to, and they're still getting their diploma, you know?
Great point. So James, as we begin to wrap it up, we're 15, well, maybe, I want to say maybe 13 minutes in. We couldn't have this great conversation and not begin to look at what are some solutions to this, right? Because like Jency said, we definitely want to give as much kudos as possible to the educators. I said this yesterday on the show. There are some teachers that's trying some real creative stuff to keep the kids engaged. DoorDash deliveries, gift cards for competition, whoever completes the exam, just to keep them engaged. We also want parents to know that just because your child decides to log on and don't do the assignment, don't mean they're marked as, you know, like teachers aren't going to know that they're not doing the work. And I know that Power U is working on some stuff specifically around bringing people together to prepare for the what ifs, the next steps, right? So I'd like to start the conversation with you. What are some of those next steps that as a community we can do? And right before that, Jency really raised a valid point that it was important for me to raise during this town hall. We also wanted to make sure that we were not just speaking to parents. The success of a child is the responsibility of an entire village, a community, and it will take all of us to make it happen. So if you are an older sister, older cousin, big brother, god sister, whoever you are, we cannot during this time put it simply on a parent and hope that a parent is going to get it. So I turn this over to James because I know that really is around the body of work that you're starting to work on around this whole distance learning thing that's going on. So please share that with us as some possible solutions. And I'm going to kind of go around to everyone. What are some solutions we want to throw out there to people who may be listening? Some possible advice, to someone who's listening and to the providers. What can we do better to ensure that next year, this time, we're having a different conversation or at least a mitigated conversation about regression?
Yeah. I think the one thing that I do want to say is, we have to be honest that there's not going to be any easy solutions to what we're going to be dealing with the next couple of years. And I think the one thing I want to sort of offer as the beginning of the solution is, if you're on this call, begin to think about what is your actual connection to the education system, but then also to the economic downturn that we're going to experience. And what I mean by that is, there is a lot of decisions that are going to be made by politicians, by administration, that you're probably not going to know exist. And we're not going to be able to influence the decision making if we're not well organized. So if you are a teacher who is on the fence, like, this is actually the time to not only join your union, but to actually get involved. If you are a service provider that provides services to young people in a nonprofit, this is actually the opportunity for you to build relationships with other program managers in different nonprofits in a non-coalition way, to say, hey, we might actually lose summer programs and funding. We need to come together now to build relationships, so when these potential funds get cut, we're actually there to advocate in a quick amount of time. And then lastly, for young people, if you are a college student, if you are a high schooler, or if you are a parent, you need to make sure that your family is in organizations that are going to actually help them make sense of what is happening. And I think the last thing that I would say too is, even if you're not thinking about public education because I don't have kids or I don't have time now, this is actually a moment that highlights so many of the essential jobs that we have are underpaid, right? Are not taken care of. But this is an opportunity for childcare workers to get what they deserve, right? It's an opportunity for folks who run daycares, folks who are parents doing domestic work. This is actually the opportunity. And in order for you to do that, you're going to have to get plugged in to an organization that is going to be moving the kinds of things you want to see. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to address some of the things that are happening long term.
Sandra, any takeaways that y'all know I'm gonna pair y'all together because y'all on the same alley. So Sandra, any takeaways, suggestions, action steps? Because I would hate for us to do all of this and not have given, anybody who's watching or who will be watching it, any action steps from any capacity.
I'm so happy James went before me, because then I can just build off from him. So, I mean, I just feel for the people who are last, so y'all want to build up after all of us. But I would say that, as a person who loves movements, like I'm a lover of movements, I know, and I've seen, if not with my physical eyes, but my very presence right now is because people thought it to be fair, to be just, that Black students could be educated, right? And so I often want to remind people that the world, and I guess America in which we see today, doesn't have to be this way. Our Florida Department of Education can be fully funded. We could have elected officials who represent our needs. We could have after-school programs galore. Some of the things we're seeing right now, free internet access, taking that from James. We could have had that before so that all students had access to internet while they were at home doing their work. So I just want to push people to use this. I mean, this is a huge year for us. I mean, there's census going on. There's a huge election this year. Don't sleep, y'all. Let's make sure that we're organized, but also that we are using our activism, that we're making sure that our voices count. It is time right now for us to really be advocates, not only for our children, if you're parents, but for all the students, all the children in our communities, for all the parents in our communities. Really quickly, when we're talking about people who don't have paid time off, paid sick time, it doesn't have to be like that, right? And I just want us to continue to imagine that, with all the monies that Jane talked to us about, it doesn't have to be like that if we were really committed to pushing America and pushing Miami-Dade County, pushing the state of Florida to be a state that really values its people. And I just want to just pause there and say, that's what I want. That's the solution. Get active if you're not active. If you want to be more active, Shirley will drop all of the contact information for all of us who are here right now. We'll tell you, we'll pull you in on how to be active around the things that really matter to you. It is a shame that in the United States of America, we're now giving free access of internet to our students. I mean, this is like a no-brainer. So, it's available. The money is there. Resources can be here. Only if we push and we ask. And I think we should push and ask, and that's my solution. Students too, show up, call your elected officials, let them know we're watching them. This is the year to do that.
Great points. Vanessa, any takeaways?
I think now more than ever, we're realizing that our barbers and our hairstylists and our nail techs are not our essential employees. I think that the folks who are most essential in our lives are the ones who are making sure that we still have food in our bellies. And those folks happen to also be immigrants. And so when we think about all these different movements that we choose voluntarily not to take part in because we're not immigrants, or maybe we were born here, we're really doing ourselves an injustice. On top of that, when we consider the measly $1,200 that they're just trying to throw at us to keep us silent, that money also comes from immigrants. Immigrants contribute hugely, immensely to the tax roll, and yet they are not able to benefit from it. And so with that said, I think that we have to, adding on to what Santra and James said, we have to not only take part in these movements, but we have to be committed to actually demanding justice for the folks around us who make it possible for us to be so comfortable in our lives. The reason that we're able to make banana bread and make all of these little creative things that we make in our house because we have nothing else to do is because there's somebody out there making sure that that produce actually gets to us. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind and not to dismiss what folks are actually going through, including the little folks who are our children.
Well said, V. And then we're going to go straight over to S.
Oh man, I don't even know how to follow you guys. I mean, it's just everything that everybody's saying. I mean, we really just have to, I think it's in an essence, it's about the power of community. I mean, if we're talking about our service providers, we need to reach out to one another and see what ways that we can work together as opposed to us building separate silos or really not putting our resources together. So I think in an essence, when it comes up to service providers, we really have to get together. Parents and students, it's kind of like what Dr. Nicholas said. I mean, it's really about managing our expectations. And this includes myself as a parent, managing my expectations that this may not get any better for the next 6 months to a year. And by me setting that clear in my mind, it helps me to kind of move past what I previously expected to what now has become my new norm, and how do I adjust to that new norm. And then to everyone else, I think it's really the power of your direct and indirect influence. Each and every person, whether you are a parent or not, whether you are a student or not, whether you are a service provider or not, each and every one of us, from the power of our phone, has direct and indirect influence. There are people that follow you, are influenced by you in some way, form, or shape. So it's important that the voice that you carry is the voice of reason, is the voice of positivity, and of course, what we're trying to do. And I always remember that quote by Benjamin Franklin. I don't know if he wrote it, but he said, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn." We want to involve everyone. You contacting your local officials, getting with organizations like Power U, or Avacen Assam, or even the VSS Hour. It's really about the power of community. So I think if we come together, we can kind of get through this within a year or two, or I don't know, but it's just really about us getting together right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Need to do two things. We definitely need to put pressure on our elected officials, but we also need to start thinking about how do we build our own community wealth, so that when something like this happens, we can survive. You look at other communities, and I dare to ask the question, if this was isolated within our community and not affecting other communities, the things that they're doing, would they have, cut those checks and things of that nature? But because it's affecting everyone, things are being done. So how do we make sure that we understand, if they're not going to take care of us, we need to figure out a way to take care of ourselves and still put pressure on them to provide us those resources, just like James talked about. So that's something that we definitely we need to talk about and consider. Hey, when the next COVID-19 hits us, we're going to make sure we have our own stuff together so that way we can survive.
Shirley, can I add one thing?
No, because I have a meeting at 8:30, as you
Go.
all ladies know that I must
add it later.
Yeah.
It's not their money, it's our money.
Yeah, because they're all supposed to be in that meeting too. Yeah, so I'm supposed to be heading out. I just want to, I do need to run because I need to let the people into the other meeting that happened now. That's why. But I want to leave by saying it is absolutely important that people realize that we are in a traumatic moment. This is a crisis. This is not a fun moment. This is not a sort of, I'm just hanging out. I'm not on vacation. I'm trying to make it. This is a traumatic moment. And because it is a traumatic moment, that everything that we do within it is somewhat normal as individuals, because the thing that's abnormal is COVID-19. So therefore, then any ways that your people in your life and how they respond, what they're doing and so forth, you have to see that as normal in an abnormal situation, right? At this particular moment. So it is important to recognize that the stress is real. You need to acknowledge it. You need to validate it. You need to hug the person that's around you. You need to have a level of patience. You need to have a level of humanity, humility is going to become crucial in terms of this particular process as well. More than ever, in terms of the Black and brown communities, it is clear that we have got to get this together for ourselves. We have got to come together and do what we need for the larger community. We are dependent on it. Gen Z's future kids are dependent on it. Look, I'm putting her having kids. Don't tell your mama. Like, right? It's like already, like they are dependent on what is it that we're gonna do today with this particular moment. So I applaud us, I encourage us to not just like wait for this to be over and trying to figure it out, but to say, what is it that we need to do now? Because the next trauma, the next pandemic, the next event is coming, right? And we don't control that, right? But we certainly control what we can do today. So I want to thank you, ladies. Thank you so much for inviting me. What a pleasure it is for me to be in the company of just geniuses in this panel. I'm just super, super, super excited and hyped. It was such a pleasure to see all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas. Thank you for always coming to our rescue. I know you have another meeting, Jency. Sandra, you want to make your comment?
I was just going to answer Ezra in terms of, I just want to remind people that the $1 trillion that we're talking about is our money. And yeah, they should give us our money. I know you're talking about wealth, and I'm all about wealth too, but I often have to say this too.
That's what I'm saying.
They need to give us our money and our resources and not decide to do other things with our money.
Right.
All right, y'all. Jency, you're gonna wrap us up. Your final comments as our young person on the panel. Me. So we're already over by 4 minutes, but I definitely thought it was important for us to kind of give everybody some takeaways. So Jency.
This is a lot of pressure. But I do want to say thank you to everybody that's on here right now and everybody who's watching at home or will be watching, because I think that's the first step. I think that it's really important that we're actually acknowledging that everything is happening right now, and that our students are suffering and that I'm suffering included, because I'm one of those students. But I think that most importantly, we just need to be patient. And I think that we need to be patient with ourselves and be patient with everyone around us. Because right now, a lot of us are being tested to kind of be flexible. We have to be flexible right now in everything that's going on. It's not going to be the same after. So I don't think anybody should be expecting to just show up to work on Monday when this is all over and think it's the same thing. So I think that as long as we work on that patience and as long as we work on being that flexible, that we'll be okay. But for now, we just got to take it day by day and just hold on to the little hope that we have.
So as we wrap up, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for joining us for this town hall, COVID-19 Stay Home Log On Town Hall. I got a couple of texts while we were doing this that people are saying, we hope this will not be the last of the conversations, but the beginning. We also want to say, for all of your expertise, I could not afford to pay you for your time. You guys have been on here going on 2 hours. It only shows your level of commitment, not just to your family, but to the greater good of this community. For the people who are watching us, I definitely want to say, please take something away, or else all of this was for naught. We want to ensure that children are not just staying home, they're not just logging on, but they're engaging with the learning process. They're engaging with continuing to learn, because the whole objective behind this campaign was to simply say, we want to see fewer of our children failing next year, fewer of our children on the other side of jails, fewer of our children, Black and brown kids, suffering from COVID-19 in 2020. So if nothing else, I don't want to leave without saying a very, very special thank you to my co-hosts, Vanessa Joseph, Sandra Dennis of the VSS Hour. I want to thank the Children's Trust for seeing value in this and saying, yes, we'll support it. I want to thank Avancé Ensemble for believing in this body of work and saying, yeah, we need to get this information out to our people, and Baton Youth Services. And I could not have done this without the entire U-Turn team, and to our producer of the VSS Hour, MC Image. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope we will see you guys again. Tell someone, share the live, share it with someone else. We'll be sure, if you want to reach us, follow us on Instagram. What else we got? Instagram, IG, Facebook. It's U-Turn Youth Consulting, and we'll connect with everybody that's on here. From all of us to all of you at your house, we'll make it through. We're all in this together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys have a great night.